just heard from newly elected House Speaker Nancy Pelosi there on Capitol Hill with a number of leaders from the House Appropriations Committee within the Democratic Party. And as we heard there, they are taking up 6 appropriations bills to fund most of the government and also the Department of Homeland Security. As the Democrats have laid out, they are the same bills that the Senate has already passed. So they were trying to use some messaging by using what the Senate has already done to say that they're just trying to do that and that the White House should pay attention and sign it. However, late in the day, Senator Mitch McConnell has called these bills a non-starter and has said that if they pass the House, it really doesn't matter. The White House has also issued a number of statements saying that they would veto against the appropriations bills that the Democrats plan to vote on this evening. So it seems that the newly elected Speaker of the House was trying to get out some messaging. Ms. Nancy Pelosi, she also said at one point, come on, let's anchor ourselves into reality. Mexico is not going to pay for this wall. CBS News Chief Congressional Correspondent Nancy Cordes joins me now on the phone. And Nancy, I heard you ask the question to the Speaker of the House. Will she eventually have to give in to what the president wants so that these workers are no longer within the government held hostage?
Right. And basically what she said is no, that they don't believe in the principle of allowing, in her words, the president to hold these workers hostage to get the wall funding that he is seeking. Their fear is that if they give in on this, then what's to stop him from doing something similar for some other priority at another time. So they believe that public opinion is on their side. They believe that there is an important principle here to protect. Republicans believe that Democrats have been willing in the past to support the border wall funding that the president is seeking in other negotiations. So why won't they just get behind at least some funding now if that's what the president so desperately wants? And obviously, there's a lot of brinksmanship going on here because this is really the first negotiation between the president and the new Democratic House majority. So everyone is kind of jockeying for position and to show that they've got the leverage. And, in the meantime, you've got these hundreds of thousands of federal workers who some of them are already living paycheck to paycheck, who now don't know when the next paycheck is coming. It's a pretty dire situation for a lot of people.
Well, we've heard those stories, it seems, over and over again, people not being able to pay their bills, worried about how they're going to feed their families, pay for the mortgage, all those different stories running through. It seems that the messaging started out one way, that they really wanted to talk about passing these bills and putting it on the Senate Republicans. And then as questions started flying towards the Speaker of the House, she got much more tough in her stance. Do you think, what did you make of that being there on the ground?
Well, she's trying to send 2 different messages. To Senate Republicans, she's saying, look, what we're proposing, what we are going to vote on, is our packages that Senate Republicans have already shown support for. In fact, in December, the Senate voted unanimously to fund the government in a very similar way that House Democrats are proposing to do right now. So they say, why wouldn't the Senate just go ahead, and if the House passes this bill tonight, why wouldn't the Senate just go ahead and pass something it already essentially passed in December? But, of course, we're now in a new Congress, so the Senate would have to do it again, and then essentially dare the president to veto it. Is the president really going to veto a spending measure that the House and the Senate have already voted to pass because it doesn't have his wall funding? At that point, the president really could not argue that it was a shutdown caused by Democrats. He would have to fully shoulder the blame himself. So that's what Democrats are trying to do. They're trying to put pressure on Senate Republicans. At the same time, they know that Senate Republicans probably aren't going to buckle to that pressure, at least not right now. And so they know that what will most likely happen is that they will pass this spending measure that would open up most of the government in the House, but that it will die in the Senate, and that Senate Republicans are going to continue to look to the president as their lead negotiator here because, frankly, Senate Republicans are just as confused as House Democrats about what it is that the president actually would accept at the end of the day. His position has changed. The vice president was floating one number, and then the president said, no, I absolutely won't take $2.5 billion. I want $5 billion. So there's even some confusion within the White House itself about what the president wants, and that has made things very complicated for both Democrats and Republicans as we move into the end of what is now a 2-week shutdown.
Well, it was interesting, too, when she was asked the question, would you provide another dollar? She said, of course, $1. That's fine.
Yeah,
so
sure,
when you start mincing between, $1 and $5 billion, we've got a little bit of an issue. One of the things I did find interesting is the Appropriations Committee. Many of the people on there try to kind of distance themselves, not necessarily saying that they don't want a wall, but trying to outline, we need more customs agents. We need to test opioids and contraband, and try not to get into the argument right away that I think Nancy Pelosi outlined of we're against a wall. Do you think in some ways it's almost as if the Democrats have been trying to show how fractured the Republican Party is, but are the Democrats in line and all have the same messaging moving forward here?
Democrats are pretty united on this issue. They don't believe in a wall. Some of them are willing to use it as a bargaining chip in certain situations. For example, they were more than willing to give the president 4 times as much border wall funding last year if it meant that they could get a permanent legal status for the so-called dreamers, young people who are brought to this country illegally. In that case, Chuck Schumer floated the possibility of $20 billion in wall funding. So this is not, some principled position from which they will never stray. But it is a major piece of leverage, and they're not going to give up that leverage unless they're getting something pretty major in return, like that Dreamer legislation. In this case, nothing is being offered to them except the reopening of the government, which is something that Congress should do anyway. So that's why they're not budging. That's why Nancy Pelosi is saying, she's not willing to go much above $1. But, what people are willing to do today is very different from what they'll be willing to do 2 weeks from now or a month from now if this stalemate drags on and is causing, pain for more and more people. At that point, both Democrats and Republicans and the White House might feel a lot more pressure to cave than they do right now. But I have to tell you, Jamie, that at this point, the two sides seem more locked in to their talking points and more locked into their positions now than they did actually before we went away for the holidays.
That's interesting. Well, and it almost seems the two parties are very, very much in line. They think that they kind of have the weight of the room right now, but we'll have to see who Americans kind of blame moving forward if this does continue, as you said, into weeks.
Sure. And Democrats think that they've got the upper hand when it comes to public opinion because aside from the president's base, a border wall isn't something that a majority of Americans believe is critically important. And certainly most Democrats see it as a waste of money. And as you pointed out, think that, many Republicans here on Capitol Hill will admit that they don't think that it is the best way to protect the homeland and that they think there are other things that could be done instead. So this is an area where, the president has a break with his own party, and yet at the same time, a lot of these Republican lawmakers know that their base is with him on this, and so they are reluctant to break with him. And they also say, hey, what's the point of all of us going out on the limb to pass legislation that he is then going to veto anyway? We need to make sure that we're on the same page with him, even if we don't necessarily share his passion for this particular project.
Well, day one as Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi speaking. And Nancy Cordes, thank you so much for breaking it all down for us.
You're welcome.
President